The 2026 foreclosure wave has already begun. You see, most people believe a crash looks like 1929. Long lines outside banks, panic in the streets, headlines screaming collapse. But that's the public theater. The real extraction happens in the plumbing of the law, where property is being surgically removed from balance sheets without a single courthouse sign or news camera present. The mechanism is silent, the transfer is legal, and the math dictates it accelerates through 2026. Today, I'm breaking down the three-stage foreclosure protocol that's currently hollowing out your city's downtown core. Stage 1 is the maturity wall. Stage 2 is the legal bypass. Stage 3 is the ownership transfer. We just crossed into Stage 1, a mandatory protocol before we open the file. This is not financial advice. I'm not a licensed advisor. The math follows a script, but your capital is your responsibility. Always conduct your own research. Here's the number they buried in the footnotes. $936 billion in commercial real estate loans mature in 2026. That's not a forecast. That's the contractual deadline written into the debt instruments right now, which means every office tower, every shopping mall, every apartment complex financed between 2019 and 2021 is repricing this year. The growth rate tells you everything. This represents a 19% increase over the 2025 revised estimate. The wall didn't shrink, it grew, because the strategy they used to survive 2024 and 2025 just expired. The strategy was called extend and amend. Some call it extend and pretend. You see, when a commercial loan matures, the borrower either refinances, sells the property, or defaults. But in 2024 and 2025, lenders had a fourth option: extend the loan term and amend the rate slightly upward to buy time. The hope was that interest rates would fall and vacancy rates would recover. They didn't. As of January 1st, 2026, those extensions expired. The can has hit the wall, which means the repricing shock is no longer theoretical. Here's the shock. Loans originated in 2021 carried floating rates around 3%. Today, those same loans are repricing at over 7%. Double the rate, same property, same cash flow. Your debt service just became mathematically unsustainable. Plus, the regulatory hammer dropped on the same day. Basel Three 3.1, also known as the Endgame, went into effect January 1st, 2026. This regulation introduces a capital floor that rises to 70% in 2026, which means banks must now hold significantly more capital against commercial real estate loans. The result is predictable. They tighten lending standards, reduce exposure, and refuse to refinance underwater properties. The borrower is trapped. The lender won't extend. The math no longer works. You're watching the largest synchronized debt maturity event in commercial real estate history. $936 billion, repricing at double the rate, with zero regulatory escape hatch. The defaults have already started. The question is no longer if the wave hits. The question is how the property transfers without you noticing. If this specific mechanism just clicked for you, or you want to track these foreclosure shifts as they happen in real time, join the forensic circle by hitting subscribe. We hold ourselves to a different standard here. Let's move to the deep dive. Because even this $936 billion wall is a distraction from the real trap hidden in the fine print of the loan documents. The trap that lets lenders take your building in 30 days without a single judge involved. That's UCC Article 9. And it's already operational. Here's the law they never explained to you. Uniform Commercial Code Article 9. Most people think foreclosure means a courthouse, a judge, a public auction on the steps of City Hall. That's the theatrical version. That's what happens when you default on your home mortgage. But commercial real estate doesn't follow that script. You see, the majority of large commercial properties in the United States are not owned by individuals. They're owned by limited liability companies, LLCs. And the debt structure layered on top of those LLCs is where the trap lives. The trap is called mezzanine debt. Here's how it works. When a developer finances a commercial tower, they typically use two layers of debt. The first layer is senior debt, secured by a traditional mortgage lien on the building itself. The second layer is mezzanine debt, which sits between the senior loan and the equity. But here's the trick. The mezzanine lender doesn't take a lien on the building. They take a security interest in the equity of the LLC that owns the building, which means the collateral isn't the property. The collateral is the ownership structure, and that changes everything. When a borrower defaults on a traditional mortgage, the lender must file a judicial foreclosure. That process requires court approval, public notice, and depending on the state, can take anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. But when a borrower defaults on mezzanine debt secured by LLC equity, the lender doesn't need a judge. They don't need a courtroom. They don't need public notice. They use UCC Article 9. And the timeline is 30 to 40 days. Let me walk you through the mechanics. Under UCC Article 9, a secured creditor has the right to take possession of the collateral upon default. In this case, the collateral is the membership interest in the LLC. The lender sends a notice of default to the borrower. The law requires reasonable notification. But here's where it gets surgical. UCC Article 9 provides what's called a safe harbor provision. If the collateral is not consumer goods, the lender can conduct a private sale of the collateral with as little as 10 days' notice. 10 days. Which means the mezzanine lender can notify the borrower on Monday that they are in default, and by the following Thursday, schedule a private sale where they sell the LLC equity interest to themselves or a prearranged buyer at a price they determine. No auction, no competing bids, no public oversight. Plus, there's an even faster path. UCC Section 9620 allows for something called strict foreclosure. Some attorneys call it friendly foreclosure, but there's nothing friendly about it. Here's the structure. The lender and the borrower agree to swap the debt for the collateral. The lender forgives the mezzanine loan. The borrower surrenders 100% ownership of the LLC. The building doesn't change hands. The LLC that owns the building changes hands. And because it's a private agreement between two parties, there's no public filing, no courthouse record, no headline. The property just quietly transfers from the developer to the institutional lender, or their designate. Your city's skyline doesn't change. The logo on the building doesn't change. But the ownership has been surgically extracted. Now, let's apply this to your reality. As of January 2026, $936 billion in commercial real estate loans are maturing. A significant portion of those loans are structured with mezzanine debt layers, which means a significant portion of those properties can be foreclosed using UCC Article 9 instead of judicial process. The developers who financed these towers in 2021 at 3% are now staring at 7% repricing. The cash flow doesn't cover the new debt service. The banks won't extend. The equity has been wiped out, which means the mezzanine lenders are already sending default notices. You won't see it on the news. You won't see a for sale sign. You won't see a bankruptcy filing in most cases. What you'll see is a quiet restructuring announcement, a new management company, a rebranding. And 6 months later, you'll notice the pension fund that used to own the building is gone, replaced by a private equity firm you've never heard of. The timeline is the smoking gun. Judicial foreclosure on a commercial property, 18 to 36 months depending on the state. UCC Article 9. Foreclosure on LLC equity, 30 to 40 days. From default notice to ownership transfer. Which means, by the time the local news runs a story about downtown vacancy rates, the foreclosure wave has already happened. The assets have already moved. The institutional buyers have already taken possession. This is why the crisis is silent. Now here's the framing. This is not just happening to office towers in Manhattan or San Francisco. This is happening to the strip malls in your suburb, the apartment complexes near your kid's school, the medical office buildings where your doctor works. Any commercial property financed with mezzanine debt between 2019 and 2021 is in the blast radius. Plus, the buyers are already circling. There's an entire class of distressed debt funds that specialize in mezzanine foreclosures. They buy the defaulted mezzanine loans at a discount from the original lenders, then execute UCC Article 9 foreclosures to take control of the properties at a fraction of the original equity value. The cycle is mechanical. The developer overpaid in 2021 when cap rates were compressed and interest rates were near zero. The property is now underwater. The lender activates UCC Article 9. The distressed debt fund takes ownership for pennies on the dollar, and the original equity investors, your pension funds, your state retirement systems, your university endowments, are completely wiped out. You see, the law was written to be efficient. UCC Article 9 exists to provide secured creditors with a fast, predictable process to recover collateral. In theory, it prevents lengthy court battles and preserves asset value. But in practice, it's a surgical extraction tool, which means the 2026 maturity wall isn't just a refinancing problem, it's an ownership transfer event. The debt matures, the borrower can't refinance. The mezzanine lender activates Article 9. The property changes hands in 30 days. And the public never sees the transaction until it's already complete. The data confirms the pattern is already operational. Multiple high-profile office towers in major cities have quietly changed ownership in the past 6 months through mezzanine foreclosure structures. The headlines called them voluntary sales or strategic restructurings. The fine print shows UCC Article 9 filings. This is the mechanism. This is the black magic buried in the commercial loan documents your city's developers signed 5 years ago. The law is clear, the timeline is fast, and the wave is just beginning. But even this extraction protocol is just stage 2 of a larger script. Because once the properties transfer to the institutional foreclosure buyers, stage 3 begins, the consolidation. And that's where the historical pattern becomes inevitable. Here's what this looks like in your zip code. Your downtown office district is currently running a vacancy rate between 20 and 35%, depending on the city. The buildings are still standing, the lights are still on in some windows, but the cash flow has collapsed. which means the debt service coverage ratio, the metric banks use to measure whether rental income can cover loan payments, has fallen below 1.0. Below 1 means the property is bleeding money every month, and that triggers the default clauses buried in the mezzanine loan documents. The pension fund that financed your city's largest office tower in 2021, they're about to watch their equity position go to zero through a UCC Article 9 foreclosure they can't stop, and most of their beneficiaries will never hear about. The state teachers' retirement system that allocated 8% of their portfolio to commercial real estate, they're staring at a 30 to 50% drawdown as the mezzanine loans default and the equity gets wiped out. You see, this isn't a Wall Street problem. This is a Main Street extraction event, because the pension funds, the insurance companies, the university endowments, they were the equity investors in these deals. They provided the down payment. They took the risk. And under the capital structure hierarchy, equity gets paid last. Which means when the mezzanine lender forecloses, the equity is completely eliminated. Your teacher's pension, gone. Your firefighter's retirement account, restructured. Your state employee benefits, underfunded by another $12 billion. And the building? It just transferred to a private equity fund headquartered in Greenwich, Connecticut that you've never heard of. The math is surgical, the law is clear, and the precedent has been written 3 times before in the last 2,000 years. Let's open the historical file. Rome didn't collapse because of barbarians at the gate. Rome collapsed because of debasement at the mint. In 265 AD, the Roman denarius, the empire's primary silver coin, contained practically zero silver. The emperors had systematically reduced the silver content from 95% to less than 5% over the course of a century. The reason was simple. The empire had overspent on military campaigns, public works, and a bloated administrative state. The tax base couldn't cover the obligations, so they diluted the currency, which means every Roman citizen holding denarii watched their purchasing power evaporate. But here's the extraction mechanism they don't teach in school. As the currency collapsed, land ownership consolidated. The patrician class, the Roman elites, who understood the debasement cycle, converted their denarii into hard assets, land, grain stores, and regional monopolies. The plebeian class, the working Romans who trusted the currency, got wiped out. By 300 AD, a small number of aristocratic families controlled the majority of arable land in the empire. The middle class had been hollowed out, the tax base had collapsed, and the infrastructure, the roads, the aqueducts, the military supply chains began to fail. The empire didn't collapse in a day. It collapsed in stages. And stage 5 was property consolidation driven by currency debasement. Sound familiar? Spain controlled the largest empire in human history during the 1500s. They extracted gold and silver from the New World at a rate never seen before or since, and they still went bankrupt. King Philip II defaulted on Spain's sovereign debt 4 times, 1557, 1565, 1575, 1596. Each default destroyed trust with the banking families who financed Spain's wars and trade routes. Each default forced the crown to offer higher interest rates on the next round of borrowing, which means Spain entered a debt spiral. Borrow, default, borrow at a higher rate, default again. By 1648, the Peace of Westphalia was signed, marking the formal end of Spanish dominance in Europe. The empire had collapsed under the weight of its own debt obligations. But here's the mechanism. As Spain defaulted, the wealth didn't disappear. It transferred. The banking families, the Fuggers, the Genoese merchants, they had taken collateral against the loans. Spanish land, Spanish trade monopolies, Spanish mining rights. When Spain defaulted, the creditors foreclosed. And the ownership of the empire's productive assets quietly moved from the Spanish crown to private financial institutions. The public saw a political collapse. The forensic auditor sees a collateral seizure event. Let's fast forward to the United States. Between 1929 and 1933, 1/3 of American farmers lost their land. Not because of a drought, not because of a crop failure, because of a debt maturity wall combined with a credit contraction. The banks had issued agricultural loans with loose terms during the Roaring '20s. Land prices had inflated. Farmers had borrowed against inflated valuations. And then the market crashed. Commodity prices collapsed. The banks stopped lending. When the loans matured, the farmers couldn't refinance. The banks foreclosed. And by 1933, institutional buyers and large agricultural corporations had consolidated millions of acres of farmland at distressed prices. The small family farm, the backbone of rural America, was systematically extracted through a legal foreclosure process that most Americans never understood until it was over. The public narrative blamed the Great Depression. The forensic record shows a deliberate consolidation event enabled by debt structure and foreclosure law. There's a pattern embedded in every imperial collapse. 7 stages. Stage 1, currency dominance and economic expansion. Stage 2, overextension through debt and military spending. Stage 3, currency debasement to cover obligations. Stage 4, loss of trust in institutions and currency. Stage 5, wealth gap expansion and property consolidation. Stage 6, the final reset, either through hyperinflation, default, or a new monetary system. Stage 7, the transfer of global reserve status to the next empire. Rome hit stage 6 in the 4th century. Spain hit stage 6 in the 17th century. The United States is currently at stage 5, moving into stage 6. And the 2026 commercial real estate maturity wall is the consolidation mechanism for this cycle. You see, the math doesn't care about American exceptionalism. The math doesn't care about military dominance or technological innovation. The math cares about debt to GDP ratios, currency debasement rates, and asset ownership concentration. And right now, the math shows $936 billion in commercial property, transferring from pension funds and regional developers to institutional consolidators using a legal mechanism most people don't know exists. This is stage 5 in action. The properties don't disappear, the buildings don't vanish, the ownership just transfers from the many to the few. Which brings us to the final question. What happens when stage 6 begins? Now, the commercial real estate maturity wall is just one pressure point in the 2026 timeline. There's another maturity wall most people aren't tracking. The Social Security Trust Fund depletion date, also projected for 2026, combined with the Medicare insolvency threshold. I'm currently writing a full forensic breakdown on that convergence, because when you layer the CRE crisis on top of the entitlement funding crisis, the math stops being theoretical and starts being systematic. If you're the type of person who refuses to be a passive victim of the script, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that breakdown when it drops. We hold ourselves to a different standard in the forensic circle. Here's what the data shows. The 2026 commercial real estate maturity wall is $936 billion. The mechanism is UCC Article 9. The timeline is 30 to 40 days from default to ownership transfer. Your pension fund is in the equity tranche, your city's skyline is the collateral, and the institutional buyers are already positioned. This isn't a prediction, this is a contractual event written into loan documents 5 years ago. You see, debt was never designed to be repaid. Debt was designed to be refinanced indefinitely, creating a permanent extraction mechanism where the interest payments flow upward and the collateral flows into fewer hands with each cycle. Debt isn't a bug. Debt is the product. Rome debased the denarius. Spain defaulted 4 times. America let 1/3 of farmers lose their land in 4 years. The script has been written before. The pattern is mechanical. And 2026 is when the maturity wall forces the next transfer. The law was passed, the vault was empty, and by the time the sun rose, the ownership of your city had changed forever.